The following preview was begrudgingly approved for all audiences.
You're listening to Elevator Music.
Welcome back to Forward Thinking, presented by the Professional Collegiate League. I'm Ricky Vellante, and I'll be joined by my co-host David West shortly. As usual in this episode, we'll be talking about those challenging the status quo, doing social good, and bringing about positive change to the world, while also talking a little bit of sports. This week, we'll be joined by two guests. We'll start things off with David McFarland, who's a driving force behind the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention's COVID-19 Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Response. He's also a member of the PCL's Advisory Board. And then we'll be joined by ESPN sports journalist Bomani Jones to discuss the state of collegiate athletics, the importance of education, and treating Black athletes with respect. I know I say this every week, but I think you're going to enjoy this one. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or check us out at thepcleague.com/forwardthinking. And welcome back to Forward Thinking. We're now joined by David McFarland, an expert in mental wellness and suicide prevention. David is also a member of the PCL Advisory Board and assists in our structuring around this very issue. So, David, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, what exactly do you do in all that I just described?
A very common question. So, look, I've been in the media, entertainment, and sports space for 3+ decades, so a long time. I know I don't look that old, but I am. And I'm also, a social impact advisor and producer, writer in film and television, and do some public speaking, specifically at the intersection of equality and mental health and suicide prevention and the sport and entertainment industry. But, essentially what I do is I bring together cultural influencers, powerhouse brands, funders, coalition partners, not just to create sort of groundbreaking original content, but also build sustainable movements that deliver social impact and measurable value across various media platforms and product portfolios. So I have basically two big companies that focus on this area. I have DLM Entertainment Group, which is a diversified media entertainment company with ventures at those intersections, pop culture, and we're dedicated really to creating sports and entertainment content that inspires and compels social change. And I have DLM Impact Group, which is a social impact consulting and management brand development firm that specializes in media entertainment and the sports sectors, engaging with leading influencers, lead athletes, artists, social enterprise, nonprofits, startups, powerhouse brands, again, to change the way people think about and respond to social issues. Really a big area of focus of mine right now is sort of this mental health and suicide prevention space, not only in entertainment, media, and sport, but for all Americans.
How exactly did you get into this? You mentioned it's been a few decades of work now within the space, but what exactly motivated you and drew you to this, and how'd you get into it?
It's a great question. So I began my career in media and entertainment, and back in the 90s, I was in New York City at MTV Networks, where we really were focused on pop culture and brands reaching audiences and sort of speaking a language to young people and creating content and programming that really spoke to the voice and gave a voice to young people in America. I worked at a number of other networks throughout my career. And then I was part of helping to build and develop the Trevor Project, which is the leading crisis and suicide prevention intervention crisis line in the country, specifically for youth and LGBT youth. And so that was at a time where there was an issue, but it really wasn't that public. And then around 2010, 11, we saw a string of young people starting to take their lives. And they caught the headlines of the media. It wasn't really represented in the media correctly in terms of how we told these stories about people taking their lives, what led to contagion. And a lot of that fell on my shoulders in terms of what are we going to do about this in America? So at that point in time, it was a lot of pressure, and I made the decision that this needed to go to the highest office in the land, went to the White House, and that's what activated everything we know today around the policy and sort of the conversation around LGBTQ youth suicide and mental well-being in general. And, bullying, quite frankly, was not on the radar screen. So as a former elite athlete myself, and my interest and work in sport, this is very near and dear to me on a lot of intersections and a lot of layers. So I took my combined entertainment and sport background and sort of began to focus on this effort, which has led me today and taking it to a whole new level and turning it into stories. Because I just sort of feel like through storytelling, and particularly unscripted or documentary films, and their portrayal, sort of the shared humanity, can and do inspire change. And even if that change is incremental, it's still nonetheless real change. And my change is to really affect mental health and suicide prevention. So as someone actually said this week, to me, and I never really thought about it in this way, is that, David, you led the nation's effort around LGBTQ suicide. Now you're confronted with leading the effort around mental health and suicide in the wake of this pandemic, and actually, quite frankly, in the aftermath of this pandemic, because this is not going away.
What do you think some of the, how do you fight the stigma for athletes, particularly now in a sense where, in football, you have to be tough, super hard, strong. Basketball, you got to be tough, hard, competitive. But then there's this stigma that comes with, recognizing that you may need help, So what do you do? What do you say to young athletes who are, chased or faced with that dilemma of the stigma around mental health?
David, that's actually is a really good question. And it's something we certainly don't talk enough about. But what we do know is that mental health and mental issues affect, at minimum, 1 in 3 elite athletes, right? And every year. So the elite sports culture, with its heavy training demands and commitments and constant drive to improve performance, and only serves to sort of heighten that risk level. So we know through current evidence that shows that the stigma is the main reason why elite athletes with mental health issues don't seek the help that they need. And that's a big problem. And that's part of the systemic issue, the institutional issue. And we're not treating the athlete as a whole athlete, right? We're treating them on the physical side for optimum performance, but the mental side is really, really critical, right? And we constantly tell our athletes and young people to be mentally tough, mentally mentally prepared. But where the heck is the mental, support that we need, from the governing bodies to the coaches to the teams? So, stigma is the most commonly reported factor that's preventing our athletes with mental health issues and stopping them from seeking help. And in the belief that mental challenges is a sign of weakness, to your point, rather than the hallmark of a winner, and would be seen as such by peers and managers and coaches and the public in general as weak, right? So these factors, play into sort of the gender stereotyping of man up, or you're not man enough. And we need to get beyond that, because until we get beyond those type of barriers, our younger athletes, that's just gonna continue to keep them, for lack of a better term, tucked quietly away and unseen, for fear that they're going to lose their position on their team, for fear that they'll lose their scholarship, for fear that they won't get a contract at the elite level, for fear that they'll be discriminated against or biased from their coaches and their former players, and they lose their position on the team. I mean, all of that are real risks that stigma sort of attaches. So it's a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I just, being in professional sports for as long as I was, we didn't get the mental wellness, mental health thing didn't come until 2011, 2012. That's when, in my opinion, things sort of came on the radar. In that, I mean, we started to learn about certain things, and guys started to be a little bit more open about some of the things and the challenges that they were facing. But how can an athlete identify that he's having a mental health crisis or he's in the midst of a mental health issue? Because sometimes, we may feel like, well, it's just a part of the game. It's just a part of what we have to go through. So how does a guy recognize that he's in a moment or in a time where he may be facing a mental crisis and may not know it?
To your point, it is an everyday occurrence, right? Just like physical injuries are everyday occurrence.
Right.
Except the stigma doesn't sort of allow us to talk about it, feel it, experience it. So current state of play in this country, quite frankly, in the world, to support the elite athlete and the mental health and well-being has centered mostly around mental wellness, literacy, and awareness of the signs of mental health issues. And that's good. Such awareness is necessary, but it's not sufficient to address the varied mental health needs of that very athlete that you're talking about.
Right.
And it's a reason why I have called for a new model in the sports industry of intervention and really truly committed to developing a framework and a backbone of a comprehensive mental health initiative to promote mental health and well-being. And those that work in the space know how to respond to the needs of the athletes that are at risk. And also, quite frankly, to move beyond the stigma so it becomes part of the natural conversation it's okay to have. So, early detection for intervention, and knowing what the signs and symptoms are of mental health issues is essential in the elite sporting, context. But, these athletes, if they're not getting the information, if coaches are not creating safe environments and allowing this conversation to happen, unless they take it upon themselves to, do their own research, nothing's going to change, right? So we in the sport industry need to develop a framework and a model of care to support these athletes. And that's one of the things that I've proposed. And quite frankly, the sports governing bodies and teams and coaches and owners and administrators all need to really be committed to this, just like they are in sinking millions and millions of dollars into the physical side. It's time to put this into the mental health side of things. So the whole athlete exists, not just a piece of it.
In terms of timeline, how important is it for not just the awareness piece, but also the resources to be made available to athletes at a younger age? Because it sounds to me like by the time you've reached the professional game, you may have already passed several critical warning signs. You may already be dealing with these issues and not even realizing it. And at that point, to compare it to a physical injury, you may already know how to exist with it, so you don't address it. So how important is it, whether it's high school, college, or even earlier than that, is it to have a national initiative in place that everybody follows?
It's critically important, right? And look, we know the topic of mental health and suicide is dark. It's complicated. It isn't the most sympathetic cause. People are afraid to really talk about it. And that's precisely why it needs our attention, like here today, what we're doing. And it needs the attention of the caretakers of the sports industry. And that goes all the way up to the C-suites of, the leagues, the institutions, whether it's, at the collegiate level, at the Olympic level, at the professional level, and at the age group level. It is no secret that this is a major public health crisis in this country. It is suicide is the second leading cause of death among our young people, 10 to 34. So if that fact alone people need to be paying attention to that, period. But the resources, look, if we look at the collegiate level, even at the professional, well, quite frankly, at all levels of sport, you walk into beautiful facilities that you see weight rooms and facilities and training rooms that support the physical side. Where does the athlete go in their environment for mental health, mental wellness?
Right.
checks, right? So if you look at the collegiate system alone, how many sports psychologists actually live within the athletic departments? I think it's around 30, right? And how many in the university, college, collegiate area do we have big sports, right? And so that athlete the majority of athletes are dealing with mental health challenges at some point in time in their career. They walk into the training room for the physical side, but where do they go for the mental health side? What they're told now, for the most part, is go across campus and go to the general population for counseling. First of all, they're never going to, few are going to do that, right? Because that's outside their family. We know that in the sports environment, that your sports environment is your family, right? And so that's sort of where you live. So in the context of whether it's collegiate or Olympic or professional, that sports psychologist and expert needs to be there and available to athletes, not just 9 to 5, 24/7, right? Those people contemplate taking their lives, in the later parts of the night, if not, very early in the morning, past midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning. So they need to be there when the need is great, regardless of whether they will go to that sports psychologist for fear that they may be exposing something that will get to their coach or to the athletic director or the owner. At least they know it's there. And it also is a sign that that institution has made a big commitment to mental wellness, right? And that part of the athletic training area doesn't have to be centered around mental illness, because mental illness is a piece of mental wellness and mental health. Everyone can benefit from being more mentally prepared. And the athlete, particularly the elite athlete, has all these levels of challenges above and beyond just the sport, right? They have everyday life. They have their academic responsibilities, their economic responsibilities, their family responsibilities. The list goes on. So, until there is a true commitment at the highest levels of sport to mental wellness, we're still going to be living with this challenge in a big way that's going to affect not only the athlete individually, but the team and various sports entities itself.
Circling back to what you discussed earlier about now the national initiative that you've been behind in terms of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention and your COVID-19 response rollout, which was first made public last week. What can you tell us about that? What exactly is it and what you're aiming to accomplish with it?
About 6 weeks ago, before the pandemic really got to where we are today, I had this vision, and I believed that really could change the game for our nation and for the mental well-being of all Americans, right? Last Tuesday, that vision moved ideas from paper to action. The launch of this U.S. National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention response to COVID and in the aftermath of the pandemic is what actually launched. This launch is a highly coordinated U.S. national response in a moment where we know a mental health crisis is upon us, and it's already in front of us. And it is basically a all hands on deck, coming together, highly coordinated, unified effort, both on the public sector side, meaning all the federal agencies, from the National Institute of Mental Health to the CDC, to the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, VA, et cetera, that are really coming together for the first time to share and coordinate efforts around this. And in the private sector side, it's really the private sector coming together for the first time. So all the NGOs in the mental health and suicide space, and all, corporate America, big philanthropy, and, big entertainment, big media, big sport, to help build an effective response to mental health and suicide in the U.S. And, we know that this issue and this public health crisis cannot be solved by one federal agency or one NGO alone. It really takes a dream team. So the dream team is led by the esteemed Dr. Josh Gordon, director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, to coordinate the leadership of this national effort, and I felt like this needed to live someplace best in class. And so the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which is the nation's leading entity in this country to bring the public and private sector together to address mental wellness for all American, is taking a leadership role to lead this effort. And so fortunately, we've been able to bring the brightest minds and experts that this country has to offer and develop solutions that truly address both the short-term and long-term mental health consequences in this pandemic. It's a challenge, and it's never been done in U.S. history, but this is an opportunity to really sort of put mental health and mental wellness in the forefront of the national conversation, and really have a real meaningful conversation of what are we going to do, because it's on the radar screen of every American, quite frankly, every citizen around the world right now.
And for those seeking more information, where could they go to find more information about the response and the resources being made available through it?
You can go to the National Action Alliance website, which is actionalliance.org, and there is a link to it. I think this automatically pops up, but that's where you would start and go. And there's ongoing. We're gonna start to see more of this conversation happen across the board. So. And the idea is, what ideally I would love to do, and for the listeners, is to create a massive national media strategy and campaign to the likes that this nation has never seen before, to put it front and center in the living rooms all across the country, so people have a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of compassion and empathy, that there are people out there that care and that are doing something about this to address this issue.
Certainly a worthy cause, and you definitely have our support in doing so. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Our listeners will hopefully take away some meaningful lessons from it, and we can keep this conversation going throughout the month. We'll have a segment on mental wellness for each episode during the month of May. Thank you again, David, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. We appreciate it. And welcome back, folks. We want to thank you for listening to Forward Thinking again. We have a special guest for you today, Mr. Bomani Jones, journalist, thinker. That's a title I put on him. A longtime ESPN host, social commentarist. We want to welcome him to our show. Bomani, thank you for coming, man.
No, I appreciate it. The wild part is that I've been doing this long enough to be a long time anything. Like, I heard you say that, and I was like, no, it fits. Like, this is kind of what it is now.
Thanks for joining us, Bomani. I always find your thoughts around college sports and in general, with everything that's happening right now with the NFL draft and with some of these signings and trades and things that's been happening, and another disappointing offseason as far as opportunities, in particular for folks like Eric Bieniemy and others. So looking forward to the conversation. Kicking it off, wanted to talk a little bit about college sports and where we're at with things right now, and sort of your perspective on that landscape and the treatment of college athletes.
Man, I mean, this is a tricky time to talk about that, because they are in legitimate crisis mode. Like, for all the stuff they talk about, we ain't got the money. Now they say it, and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, so you guys maybe don't have the money right now, of course, because you probably spent too much of the money that you had before. Like, what we've learned, I feel like, in this crisis is that as much as we talk about people living check to check, little did we know that all these businesses were living check to check, right? Like, all these entities and all these operations were living check to check. And you're going to learn that a lot of college athletics programs were living check to check. Like, they always said that if they had to pay players, they'd have to get rid of all these other programs. And we're starting to see now they're starting to get rid of these programs before this other stuff has even come up. Like, they're in a dicey place, but none of that has anything to do with whether or not you need to treat the players fairly. Right now, the real concern is, are they going to put them out there on that track to get that money in spite of whatever the health concerns are? Because everybody's money is in peril right now.
Right. Now, do you think that's a part of sort of what because they haven't been able to spend the money on players, so they've ballooned in other areas, right? You got 4, 5, 6 athletic directors in one department and 8 different levels of employee, secretaries and all these different things. Like, do you think it's because the money has gone there? Now, all of a sudden, it's like, well, man, we've got to get rid of all of these extra employees, because that's who's being cut right now in terms of the college sports?
Yeah, I think that that's a big part of it is that, look, they had the money to blow. And since they had the money to blow, they were trying to put it in people's pockets. But one place they put it in people's pockets that I need to do more research on, but this seems like a worthy hypothesis. A lot of these programs are carrying heavy debt loads for stadium construction. And they kept doing all this stuff to make the stadiums bigger and to keep adding seats. But guess what? Even before this happened, attendance was down. Like the trend of going to stadiums was going away. But they put all this money into these stadiums, and those bills are coming due. And so that's why now they're coming back and looking at all these athletic directors and everybody else. And they're kind of like, hey, we could have you. That's why we had you. But if somebody's got to go, it's going to be you. Like, it's going to be a long time before they start like firing football coaches, right? Like the assistant strength coach, you're still good. You ain't got nobody to work out with right now. Don't matter. You are still good. But you over here working with the tennis program, hey, don't know about that.
And we've already had UC cut soccer, Old Dominion's cut wrestling, so we are starting to see that first level of Division I programs starting to cut sports. We're seeing Boise State furloughed all employees that were being paid more than $40,000, even in the athletic department. So I think you're spot on. And coming out of this, do you see a reset on compensation for college coaches and administrators?
Boy, we're going to learn a lot, right? Because in theory, we should. Right. In theory, everything should dial back and they should have to get some money back from these coaches on these exorbitant deals they have. Like the one thing we're going to see a reset on is the buyouts. Like that's where we're not, a whole lot of teams going to be stuck with coaches they don't want for a little while right now because they're not going to be able to afford to get that money back. So in theory, I would think that at some point you'll see a reset. Like Dabo Swinney, his money ain't going back. Right. And I think he can make an argument that his money shouldn't go back. Saban's money, that's not going to wind up going back. But the days of these cats getting raises for going 7-5, oh no, baby, this is over. Like you're gonna have to ride these deals out. I'm very curious how many things they're gonna try to do to avoid having to do that. Because like to me, I feel like when we talk about all the money these coaches are making, we don't put it in the context properly of the cost of living of where they are. So like we're not talking about somebody making $5 million a year to live in New York City, right? You're making $5 million a year to live in Stillwater, Oklahoma, man. How much money do you need? Like, what are we talking about? Like, did you see that picture last night? I mean, he's not a college coach anymore, but that picture last night of Cliff Kingsbury at his house in Phoenix during the draft. Number one, I love the fact that Kingsbury was dressed for a day party, right? He's like, yo, they be looking at me all the time. I'm always ready. But in Phoenix, you can get a house like that for a not ridiculous amount of money, like what we're seeing ridiculous in New York. You could get something like that. These cats in these college towns, man, it doesn't take all this money to be able to live like a king in any of those places.
That's a good point. See, that's my thing now, right? It's like the players are more aware. When I was in college 20 years ago or whatever, it's crazy that it was that long ago. But I didn't see, like I saw our coach driving a Jaguar or whatever. It was like, oh, okay, coach got a Jaguar. I think because now information is out there, these guys are now questioning, hey, why is coach doing this and doing that? And they're living in these same places. The coach has got, $5 million in salary. The players got cheeseburgers and hot dogs, after a game. So I just think we're in a very trying time. What do you think about, what does this do for the landscape of coaching in terms of employment opportunities for African Americans? Does it make it more difficult now? I believe it just made it much more difficult.
Oh yeah. You just got a whole nother excuse, right? The only place where it could help black coaches is in a way that doesn't help. But if you believe in the argument, a job is better than no job, then you think it's a help. Where you always notice, man, when the athletic program is a little low on their dough, right? Or they're in a little bit of a pickle. Now all of a sudden it's time for a commitment to diversity.
That's what I was thinking. Right.
There's gonna be some cats getting offered some jobs that they don't want. Right. Like I remember once, I think it was about 10 years ago, both of the Division I football programs in New Mexico had black coaches, right? Michael Oxley coached one, Dwayne Walker coached the other. And I can't remember which school it was. I think it was New Mexico State where Walker was. Things were so bad that they were putting out an ad in the newspaper asking the community to donate snacks like trail mix so the kids could eat, right? Like coming into bowl season and stuff like that. That's the kind of job that they offer black people, right? Where you got to go out and beg for food. So when some of these places just have it where because of scandal or something, they have to fire somebody.
Right.
Oh, yeah. They'll call us then. right?
Yeah, because the scale would be low, and they'll say no. Right.
And
Wow.
they don't want to insult no white man by offering them a job they know is a loser, right? Like that gets you kicked out the club.
In terms of the university spend and in this movement now towards continued expansion of rights for college athletes, do you think this helps or hurts, or is it really indifferent to the overall conversation around how and when college athletes should receive some form of compensation?
I think there's a strong argument for helps because what is this doing to the money for the booster class, right? Because, I mean, I think there's enough of these places where you got guys who have decided they're going to be the bank for players and they decide they're going to be the ones that throw that money around. Do they have that money anymore? Like, I don't know if you saw the price of oil, where it's actually at the point now the price of oil is negative, which is to say that they'll give you money to take the oil away, right? Because airlines aren't doing anything with the oil, so they got all they can stand, they got all they can need. Texas A&M, for example, their booster class is an oil money class.
Absolutely.
Like that's where all their money comes from. That money they planned to play Jimbo Fisher, that $7 million, that was based on high prices of crude. That crude price is way low. Now, I'm not saying anything specific about Texas A&M. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. If hypothetically the money that above and below the table was helping you secure players was from the oil money, and the oil money is not coming, then you need to get that money however you can. And if your argument now becomes, I'm gonna let them go get that money for themselves, then maybe that lightens your load, maybe it makes it easy. But the people that are supplying money, their money is hurting right now. That's the best argument I got, is that in terms of helping, maybe that'll be it. I think, like, especially now with what's going on in basketball, that they got a whole new situation that they got to figure out. Because I think the worst thing that may have happened in the NCAA, and maybe I'm just speaking for me, I don't know about you, but they canceled the NCAA tournament and I didn't miss it.
Me either. Right, that's a huge point. I thought people were going to be a little bit more ruffled by it, like, damn, I don't have nothing to do. But it was like, oh, okay, just another thing. Yeah,
we done watching mid-tier players, right? And so, like, I think about, like, Dave, when you were in school, right? You were the National Player of the Year in 2003, right? And you were a senior, and there's still, like, the value in the guys who come in and become seniors and, like, become very good players. But we still had, even with guys going to the NBA, we still had, like, the top end of players in college basketball was still, like, pretty strong. The top end of players now, them dudes that are still there just aren't that good. Like, and basketball, I can watch mediocre football and enjoy it. I really only enjoy high-level basketball. And they don't provide high-level basketball. So if they're getting, like, Jalen Green and these cats to go play on some traveling all-star team that's going to play against national teams and get all the exposure that they can get, and they can get, like, 12 dudes on that team, that's 12 dudes that aren't playing college basketball. They're the dudes that make college basketball worth watching.
So that's something I definitely want to talk about. Before we get into that, though, to wrap up on college sports, do you think we're going to see an interruption in college football and or possibly college basketball with everything that's going on right now?
I will be surprised if there is a college football season this year. Because the problem is, as soon as one kid catches it, everything has to shut down, right? As soon as one state says, we can't do this here, then nobody else is going to be able to do it. Like, I was laughing at the draft last night as they, were figuring out how to do it, and that was all real interesting. Get ready if next year's draft comes around and they have to evaluate everybody off of their junior and sophomore tape. Because these dudes, I just don't think there's going to be a college football season. Like, it's going to be amazing as they try to figure out who in the world they're supposed to draft. Like, they might be able to have, like, a real draft by the time that comes around. But it's just hard for me to think that, like, the state of California, for example, is going to open the doors and allow for, I mean, college football team has 100 people on it. Right? Like, you can't social distance at all under those settings. Are you going to be able to bring these boys on campus if the rest of the student body isn't there and you still sell the idea that they are students? You're not going to be able to do that. And so for that reason, I just don't think that they're going to be able to have this season. And, oh boy.
I mean, so what you're saying is you're talking about a doomsday, apocalyptic kind of moment for college sports. I mean, because if you're talking about losing college football, and I said this, I've been to a Virginia Tech game, and I'm telling you, 60,000 people just outside. You're walking through thousands and thousands and thousands of people. You don't know who's been where. I just couldn't see that environment. But if college football doesn't exist for, the nature of sports, I mean, you're talking about a major shift.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, look, first of all, I want to be clear about one thing. I understand all these people with money trying to get everybody out here to go back and get this money, right? Because if your job is getting money, the people who ask you to get money ain't really trying to hear no excuses, right? Like that, like David, David West, we need you to guard Shaq. Shaq ain't bigger than me. All right, cool, but I need you to guard Shaq, right? And you're like, yo, I can't guard him without fouling. Well, then I guess you're gonna be fouling, right? That's the same thing with these guys, right? Like everybody, like the money goes down. Everybody needs the money to a degree. They're gonna try everything they can to get the money. And when I hear people talk about like the economies that are around these programs, that is all very true. There are gonna be a lot of regular people who catch L's off of this. There are a lot of players who honestly are better off being on a college campus than in the environments that they are in previous. All of these things are true. But if the governor says we're not doing this, then we're not going to do it. You saw what happened to old buddy in Georgia who was like, we're going to send everybody back outside, right? And then he talked to the president that night, and the president was like, way to go. And then the next day, the president was like, nah, you shouldn't do that.
Right.
Do you want to be that next guy to come out here and make that call? Nobody does.
Wow. I mean, so what does college football look like a year from now with the missed season?
I fear that it looks like a lot fewer programs than we had before. Like a lot of these programs are taking losses because they just think it's a big deal to have a college football program. Like these newer programs that have popped up, it's kind of like NBC with the Olympics, where NBC normally does not make a monetary profit off of the Olympics and the billions of dollars that they pay. But what they do is they put all the advertisements for the fall season. Right. And so it becomes imaging for everything else they do. And that's the way a lot of these programs have treated college football, where they don't get enough people. They don't need to make it a money maker. They don't have a TV deal to make it a money maker, but they get to tell people we got a football team, and that makes them seem like a bigger deal. I don't see how those programs are going to be able to survive if they don't have the revenue that's coming in. Like in a sad way, as an HBCU grad, I worry about forget about the programs. I worried about the schools. I'm not sure how many of them are going to be able to open their doors back up. And so I think that the programs that are at the top are absolutely going to be able to survive because they're insulated a little bit better from this. But some of these programs that are down at the bottom, like what's going to happen with the Pac-12 and all the money issues that they generally have and the terrible television deal that they generally have? How is Washington State or Oregon State supposed to keep this going under these circumstances? Or Colorado, that's like been dying of the same heart attack and having the same money complaints for decades, right? I don't know what they are supposed to do. Like I've always said, when it's time to pay players, like people did need to be honest. They're like, well, if we couldn't pay players, we won't be able to have a wrestling team. But my thing is, all right, we're just not going to have a wrestling team, right? But we do need to be honest. You probably would lose the wrestling team.
So to put it in context, because I think a lot of people think of college sports still as this sort of amateur, homely thing. The loss of March Madness was about $1.1 billion through the TV revenue just for those 16 game days.
Right.
College football generates, depending on whose numbers you believe, between $8 to $10 billion annually.
Wow.
So the loss of that, like again, we're talking about 8 to 10 fold monetary impact on these institutions. And to your point, particularly with the mid majors, HBCUs, lower end Division I schools, sometimes their budgets are comprised of 80 to 90% based off the revenue they generate from basketball and football.
Yeah, like that NCAA tournament part in particular, where for the NCAA itself is something like not 100% of their revenues, but it's in the high 90s. Like that's where they get all their money from.
Right.
Exactly.
I don't know what they're supposed to do right now.
Right. So I know that there's also the idea out there that college football could get pushed into the spring as opposed to a fall semester thing. I'm not even sure that would be able to be pulled off, but it's certainly a space worth watching.
I mean, they go try. I could not blame them. Like if I worked in college football every day, everybody that works here, your job is to figure out how we gonna do this. Right. You know, you heard Mike Gundy, right? He says these boys are 20, 21, 22. They can get out here and fight this virus. Right. Right. Like somebody's job is to tell him no. But his job is to be like, but what about this? Right. But what about this? Right? Like how are we supposed to be an institution of higher learning and can't nobody figure this out? Right. Get them all in here. We have to figure out how we are going to get back out here. Right.
That's a fascinating thing. And now, so circling back to the NBA GL, and for those of you that don't know, Jalen Green got, $500,000 plus a whole string of benefits to jump onto this G League adjacent pro academy team. And now we've had Isaiah Todd since commit, and depending on what happens in the next hour or so, we might have Greg Brown being the third player to join the team. How does this shift beyond just the upper talent level more psychologically for athletes, how does this start to shift their approach to how they are going to reach the NBA?
Well, look, man, this generation of young men does not dream of playing college basketball, right? Like, I think that's the biggest. Yeah, the biggest part that's flipped up is this isn't something they've had in their minds is like, this is something that I've always wanted to do. Like, you might wind up with some kids, like as an example, some kid that's from North Carolina who always wanted to play for UNC or something like that. And you can sell him on the idea of playing at UNC because he always dreamed of it. And I feel like UNC is really kind of like the school that does this the toughest. Duke is kind of tried to duplicate it. If you're UNC, what you have to counter the idea of going to get paid is you can become a part of this network, right? Like you can become a part of this family. You will know Michael Jordan.
Right.
If you come and you hang out, and you become one of these guys, right? Every dude I've ever talked to who played for Carolina, they've all hung out with Mike at some point, right? Like, because
it's a part of it, right?
Yeah, they really believe, like it's not cliche, right? It's player driven, and they really believe it. You can sell them on that. But these other kids, man, if you've been transferring schools every year, basketball became a job for you when you were 14 years old. And you're looking for what's the best basketball job that is available? Oh, this one where they're paying 500 G's and I can start making some shoe money and I'm working out under NBA environments and I'm going to be working with coaches who come from the NBA to get me to the next stop.
Right.
I'm not going to go play for Louisville, right? Like if that's what you're offering, I mean, it's not going to be it. And for $500 legitimate $1,000, this isn't even a trade, right? Like it's not. And so for college, they're going to have to figure out what are you offering these guys, and they still have the most spots, and they'll still have places to put a lot of guys. And the late bloomers, it'll still be a better place for them. But if I was in the Jalen Green situation, I don't see how, especially this year, where we don't know if it's going to be a college season. But if I'm one of those guys, look, being a grown-up stinks, and I do think there's that part that you're going to have to, like, immediately become an adult, and that is more than a lot of these guys think of. Dave, I imagine you saw that with these guys coming in young, but they're like, cool, I'm just going to be playing ball, and then they looked around, and it's everything else that you have to do, right? But, man, if you paying 500 G's and I got to go somewhere else to struggle, no, man, I'm taking a 5.
Now, for that next guy, so, I mean, again, to layer in some context here, supposedly this is only going to be made available to about 5 or 6 guys at the beginning, and at least for the foreseeable future. Obviously, we'll see how this opportunity develops. But what about that next guy? Like, psychologically, what do you think they go through when they don't have that opportunity? What are they thinking? Are they thinking Australia? Are they thinking Chameleon BX? Or are they just going to say, I'm going to double down on Duke or UNC or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think you need a really good offer from a college. And I also think, like, I remember when Brandon Jennings, who was really kind of the first guy to go overseas and make that happen, and how excited I was at the idea of him going. Sonny was behind it, and I love Sonny to death, right? Like, it was all going. And he did that. He got $1 million deal. He had a shoe contract. He had all of that stuff. And he was like, man, that was so hard. Right? He went over there and he said that was so hard. But he went because he didn't academically qualify. Like, it wasn't like it was the first thing that was on his mind. And so to me, I look back on it and I remember I went to college. I was 17 when I got to college, and I accidentally alienated everybody I went to school with, and I didn't realize it. And part of the reason was my parents are college professors, and so I'd always been around college environments, so I was not intimidated by the thought of being in college. Like, I was very comfortable. And those kids were scared to death, right? Like, they'd never been this far away. They never had to do all this stuff. And here I am being all obnoxious about all these things or whatever. But I bring that up to say that going to college is a very, like, frightening time for a lot of people. Now imagine that you're going to a whole nother country to try to do all this stuff and to try to get it right. And so maybe if you've got your network right, you got the right people around you, you can go do it and somebody will provide you the money. It can be a great opportunity, But I think that a lot of these teams overseas are going to have to do something that they've often been reluctant to do, which is they're going to need to ease these guys along, right? They're going to need to understand that this is what they're coming into, and they need to make sure, to me, that their goal is that this guy is a better player when he leaves than he was when he came in, if they're going to try to attract these kinds of players. And if it demonstrates itself that these other places can improve you as a player, then that's the place that I think they're going to go. The real question people need to ask is, how much is college basketball developing guys? Or how much of that is just time of getting older and getting stronger, and some people like move at a different pace? But college basketball, for that high level of dude, they're going to need to figure out how to make them better basketball players. And for the low level dude, you're going to need to make sure, how do we make sure we get this guy educated? Because these are the things that those two groups are going to need.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the fact that even the guys that reach the NBA, you're looking at an average career span of only about 3.5 seasons. How important is that educational component for these athletes that they have to be provided with a meaningful educational opportunity with the odds already stacked against them significantly on the basketball side?
Yeah, when I look at that, the people that I really look at now that I think have been allowed to kind of skate on this to a degree, and I'm not putting any names on it because I don't know these guys personally, but like the Oak Hills and like the Montrose Academies of the
There you
world
go.
and all these places.
Ooh.
Because that's
Yeah.
like, to be fair to a lot of these colleges, by the time they get some of these dudes, it's too late.
And just for context, what Bomani's talking about is the elite, these prep schools where kids go and find themselves supposedly being best prepared for the next step. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like those guys, like, are you ready for college after you leave those places? Because again, a lot of these colleges, by the time they get them, it's like, what do you expect me to do? Right. Like I was a TA for Econ, what is now Econ 101 at UNC when I was there. And I got one scholarship athlete. Like I had a couple of walk-ons, but they ain't really pushing them boys to go take economics, right? They try to stay out. And so I had one, and I remember reading emails from one of them, and I was just like, "How are you in college?" Right? Like not even in a snide, judgmental way, but this is not somebody who was ready to be in college, And I think that a lot of these schools in the beginning, they have a responsibility to that. Like Ross Perot, former presidential candidate, was a polarizing figure in the state of Texas because he was the guy that dared say that if you failed a class the previous grading period, you should not be able to play football or sports in the next grading period. Because people were they were just out there with kids as ringers, just not doing anything and just coming out here and playing football. And that was a divisive issue in the state. The idea that you were going to make these kids actually pass their classes in order to keep on playing. And these people have to bear some measure of responsibility at some point as to how are so many of these guys, and not all of them, unprepared for college. Like they come out better off after 4 years, but they don't necessarily come up like educated.
Not prepared necessarily to face the world without basketball or without the bubble of sport. Yeah, I totally agree. And now how much of that responsibility do you think is on the players though? Because I've kind of gone back and forth with guys about this at the NBA level, about the amount of personal responsibility that's supposed to be there.
There is, right? And I don't ever want to ignore the idea that you got to put in what the grind is that you're supposed to put in, right? But I believe it is a society's obligation to educate its children. It is not the children's obligation to become educated, right? Education is a public good in the sense that it makes everything better for everybody. Like I always say, when people say they don't want to do this and that to help poor people, I'm like, look, you can give them the money or they can rob you. Right? Like one way or another, they're going to get it from you. Like you pick, right? It is our obligation. It makes everything safer, it makes everybody happier. It does all these good things if we do that. And so the players have an obligation, but I have always been of the belief that overwhelmingly, not everybody, but overwhelmingly, if you tell kids that education is important, they will treat it as though it is important. They might not be the hardest workers in the world, but they'll at least acknowledge that this is important. But I feel like a lot of these cats are like, man, it's cool. I'm going to make it to the NBA. Right. And they figure once I get to the NBA, what do I need this education for? Of course, you still need it. Right. Like, but that's their thought process. But I feel like the adults around them are the ones that have to make this abundantly clear. And if it's like, OK, you're not doing the academic stuff you need to do, then you're not going to play ball. And I bet somebody figures it out by then.
So is that partially a result of the system, the support network, or everything, the dependency that gets created on a sport? This was something we talked about with Howard Bryant a couple of weeks ago, that it's an element of control that from the very top sports organizations are creating, where basketball, just in this context, we'll stick to basketball, that needs to be the end all be all. And the moment you start having other interests, we're going to question your commitment to the sport.
Right. Think about this, right? I don't know if you watched the ESPN broadcast of the draft last night. And I'm not so much throwing shade, but I do think that this is something that you can't ignore. A couple of years ago, the tenor of the draft kind of changed. And one thing they're really, really going heavy on is all the hardship that these guys have overcome, right? Like if your cousin died, we're going to talk about it, right? Your little sister died, we're going to talk about it. Whatever it happened to be, your granddaddy, whoever it is, whatever miserable circumstance that you have endured or you have come from is kind of the centerpiece there. But I think it fits into a larger narrative that people tell about like football saving people's lives. And it's, and I feel like, and I don't even know if they're doing this on purpose, but I think implicitly it gives the idea of where would they be without football? where would they be without this game, right? And we sell that and we give it all the time, and we put that through to people very often. They're like, where would I be without basketball? What would I do without this game? Where would I be? And so when you reinforce that, then the school and the game does wind up having that measure of control. Like, one thing you don't hear that much about these days is guys who like quit the football team just to go like be students. You know, that's like, I ain't doing this. You transferring? Nah, man, I'm just going to go like, hang out on the quad with the other kids. Right.
Well, they're doing it in the NFL. They're retiring early in the NFL because of their head stuff. But, that's a totally different.
But look at who those kids are who are doing it, right? Like, it's kids that come from something. That guy, like the Borland kid whose dad runs like a financial services company or something like that.
Right. I saw that.
Like, what am I doing? What am I doing for $400,000? Are you kidding me?
Right.
Well, I wish these kids also understood that a 3-year career ain't really going to change your financial life. Right. And that's the part, like, what's hard to explain to people is $500,000 isn't a lot of money. No, I mean, it is a lot of money, right? But if you start from zero, $500,000 is not changing your life. Like, it's making your current situation better. But $500,000, we take out about $250 for the tax, right? We take out 3% for the agent. We take out everything that you got to do to train and everything else that's on your own dime. And then on top of it, you can't just like go save money on an apartment. You can't just be living in an apartment with any old body. You would do it in the league now, right? Like, it's not, and part of it's about status, but part of it is also just about, you got cats at your door all the time once they find out that you're the one that lives here. Okay, now you got to get a car. I mean, you could try to go get a Civic and save some money, but you're 6'7", baby. Right? This isn't what it's going to be. Okay, so now that expense winds up being higher. You got some people that you told were going to take care of, and they think you got all the millions of dollars in the world, but you don't. But you've agreed to it, so now you're going to give them some money. By the time those 3 years are done, you might have a knot or a stack of about $150,000 left over, and that's a nice little stack to have to like keep you going while you look for a job. But like most of the guys, the career that you're going to have, it's not going to be enough money to make it worth it to put everything that you do into this. It's just not. Like, think about how many 5-star guys never make the league.
Yep.
Right.
Every year. 5-star guys don't even play.
Right. And you could go play like around the world and get your money and make it happen and get some experiences and all that stuff. And it's cool. But after you come back, you're going to be looking for a job.
Right. Something to do. Right.
Yeah. And some way to eat. Right? Like that money's just not going to last forever. You're going to need to come find a job. And then what are you going to do? Try to get paid off of my name is ... You've been playing in Cyprus for the last 4 years, man.
Right.
We don't know you.
So where do you think that where do you think that fine line is? Because on one hand, you want guys to experience or to attempt to get the most out of themselves as athletes. But then on the other hand, you don't want guys to just go over the cliff and say, I'm all or nothing with or without this, with the sport or without the sport. Yeah. So where's the balance?
I tell you where I feel like people could start, like where they could. I remember my dad told me this before I went to school, and it was the most important thing he told me. I didn't always adhere to it, but the most important thing he said was just read before class. It's like if you read before class and then go to class, you got other stuff to do on top of it, but doing those two things, you will come out so much better off, right? You ain't got to be grinding and studying 10 hours a night or anything else. But if you do that little bit, right, I think you'll wind up being okay in the end. Graduate, don't graduate, whatever it is. You can participate in conversations. You can know what people are talking about, all of those things. That just treat the school stuff like it matters just a little bit, right? And if we could explain to people that, like, we talk about the schools throwing guys into joke majors, and that happens a lot. But in that joke major, you can still learn something, right? You can still figure something out.
Right.
And
I was in one of them, right?
Yeah, right. You know what I mean? And what you figure out is, this major, like, it's not engineering necessarily, so I can't point to you exactly where you're going to get the money, but you learn to think about some stuff, right? You learn the game that these people are trying to run on you. At the very least, if you could get that part across, I think that in the end, they wind up being okay. Like a lifetime of financial security isn't promised to anybody. Like that's not a guarantee. But if all you going to do is play basketball, and after a certain while, like some of those hours don't help that much, right? No disrespect. Like you can shoot 1,000 free throws every day. I bet it'll be the same as if you shoot 500. Right. It's that much different.
going back to one of your earlier questions or answers, I should say, where's the onus fall with the university even the coaching staff to ensure that the athlete, there's an atmosphere of accountability and responsibility around that beyond just, hey, I've got my APR bonus, so I really need you to pass that class.
All those APR bonuses is such a con, right? So it's interesting. I think it was Fran Fraschilla I once saw say this, talking about the different jobs that he worked. And he was like, at Manhattan, the priority was to educate players and graduate them.
Right.
But he was at Manhattan College or Manhattan University, whichever it is. When he got to New Mexico, and what people have to understand is that in New Mexico, University of New Mexico basketball, like that's the team of the state. It was about winning games. Like that's the job that he was hired to do, to win games. And so I feel like part of it falls on the coaches, but I also feel like coaches are not academic officers. The schools make the decision about whether or not they care about these players being actual legitimate students. Case in point, Notre Dame, for as long as I live, will never win another national championship in football. They just won't. And the biggest reason is it's really hard to put together a championship football team with 85 guys who can take calculus as freshmen. And they do not bend on you have to take calculus as a freshman. And I respect the hell out of them for that, because they have decided that this is what a Notre Dame student does. And these football players are going to be Notre Dame students. And this is what they have to do. Got it. These other schools are doing this, and we can easily blame it on the coaches, but the coaches are like, yo, I know there's some bullshit. You know there's some bullshit. Let's just come out here and win some games, right? And, and then whenever it happens and it all comes down, like it happened with Bob Huggins at Cincinnati, right? It all shakes out, and we all go blame Bob. And Bob is like, I thought y'all said y'all wanted to win games. I went and got you some dudes who could win some games, right? This is what it is. Nolan Richardson, when his teams did not have the academic performance, they all blamed him. And Nolan was like, these dudes are so much better off from the 4 years that they have with me that using graduation as a metric kind of misses the point of what all of this stuff is, right? As it all gets put together. And so the coaches, like, if you are just obviously disrespecting like the intellectual capacity of your players, then that's one thing. But there are a lot of dudes out here, I do believe, that still legitimately care about the end game for their players. And I do hate the fact that this has evolved to a point where the number one reason the guys get into it is not because they want to work with young people, right? Like if you do a job working with young people, but you don't want to work with young people, then why the hell are you here, man?
What are you doing it for? Right. If you don't want to get the most out of them, invest them and give them the right information, what are you doing it for? Right.
Like Nick Saban, who was a bit of a tyrant when he was with the Dolphins, he's not actually really a tyrant at Alabama. Like he is a dude that actually real life cares about his players. Like this is a thing for him. I remember one of his guys he got busted for something. It may have been a charge. It was some level of assault. I can't remember if it was against a woman or not. But he did not put him off the team. And everybody came and asked Saban, well, why did you put him off the team? And his thing was, I'm not putting him off the team to show you guys how tough I am. I'm not putting him off the team to make this point to you. I know this guy. I care about what happens to him.
Right.
So I'm dealing with this in the way that I think is best for him. And I think that a lot of people cynically would look at it and be like, oh, you just wanted that dude to play. Saban got player after player after player. He don't need no one. He don't need no one. No, he was just like, I'm not running him off the team because I need to show you guys that I'm about law and order. I'm not going to do that. That's a man that cares about his players. But you can see the terrible things happen around here are these places where the dudes do not care about their players.
Right. And I remember that because I think that was the same. He basically was saying if I send him out of this environment, it's going to be worse for him where he's going to go, and I can keep him, and we think we've got a better path for him.
Yes.
Right. And so I did gain a lot of respect for him in that regard because he did. And it's very rare that coaches of that caliber show that kind of compassion because usually they align with public sentiment. You need to just crack the whip, come down on him, and see where he ends up. I also think about a time, and this is kind of off subject, but think about Nick Saban. I gained respect for Nick Saban when he was like on 60 Minutes one time. I don't know if you saw this, but he's on 60 Minutes, and they tried to gotcha him. Like, what do you have on the radio? And he said, you really want to know? And it was fucking Michael Jackson playing. I was like, holy shit. Nick Saban listens to Michael Jackson. That threw me off.
Yo, have you seen all the videos of him doing the electric slide at recruits' houses?
Yeah.
Right. And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, oh shit, Nick Saban does the electric slide. And I was like, do you realize how many of these houses he's been in? Like I did an interview on the radio once with Lou Holtz. He was on my show. And I got all kinds of historical problems with Lou Holtz that go
Right,
back.
right.
Don't forget, Lou Holtz basically lost his job at Arkansas for doing an ad for Jesse Helms. Like, never forget that, right? Like, Lou Holtz's current political turn is not new. But I'm talking to Lou Holtz. I'm like, hey, Coach, how are you? He's like, what's your name? I said, Bomani. He's like, say the name again. I said, Bomani. Let me hear that one more time. Bomani. Okay. And then we started, and he's in full Lou Holtz mode. Oh, Bomani, it's so great to talk to you. Da, da, da. And I stopped and thought about it, and I was like, the names that Lou Holtz has had to learn on the drop of a dime, 3 syllables and 6 letters, so low. Like, this is a buddy slope. Lou Holtz when it comes time to figure out how to say this dude's name, right? These cats been everywhere, man. They seen all kinds of stuff.
Right. Absolutely.
To circle back, hone in on one thing, because we talked about this a lot with HB, about structural and systemic change, and that's where the focus needs to be on. So what I hear you saying when you're talking about a lot of these coaches actually do the right things by these players is that it is more of the environment created by the university's leadership that allows for these sort of players to fall through the cracks and to get a lesser education than the rest of the people on campus, because there's an expectation of victories, because there's the marketing component of the football team or the basketball team.
Yeah, the problem that I think always shakes out is these dudes are on campus to serve, right? So, like, if you were to ask me, like, before we get to all the money and everything else, like, what's the purpose of having a team on campus? It is to improve school spirit, right? Like, that is the biggest thing about it. Get something that everybody can rally around. It makes the environment better. You know, that's before we get to all the TV deals and everything else. Why do we have these teams? School spirit. Like, that was the really biggest thing. Like, why do you have a high school football team, right? I mean, that makes a little money for some people, but it doesn't really make any money, right? It's, it's for the environment. It's for all of those things. And once we got to college, what these colleges are basically saying is we're letting in dudes that we don't think should be here. And we'll do this because they serve us a purpose and because they make us some money. Well, what about trying to educate them? If they wanted to educate those boys, they'd have been letting them into school already. They're not letting them in for that. They are letting them in order to play these games. And so the coaches, I think it goes 2 ways on them. One way is they don't have to recruit everybody. They can decide to recruit students, like, if that's what they want to do, right? And they can decide to recruit kids that they think can become students, whatever it is, they ultimately can make that call. But when the rubber meets the road, it's the school that's going to make the decisions about what they want their program to be like, and they don't have to tolerate these things if they don't want to. So, like, University of Miami is a fascinating example, of course, right? Because it is a Tony private school that's down there in Coral Gables, except they happen to have the most prime real estate in recruiting and didn't know it, except them boys are nothing like the Miami that's in Coral Gables. And now all of a sudden you got all these dudes, and it's worth noting, these dark-skinned dudes showing up with gold teeth, right? Ain't never been around no white people before, all of this stuff. And then they're down in Miami. But when you go back, especially with those 80s Miami guys, and listen to them talk, dude, them cats are not just smart, but, like, informed, like, clearly. Like, Michael Irvin, for example. Michael Irvin left as a junior, I want to say, and I think he graduated, before he had gotten out of there. All of those dudes, like, you think Alonzo Highsmith sounded like that before he got to Miami? Michael Irvin, you think he sounded like that before he got to Miami? Like, all of those things. But Miami clearly had made a call that on some level, y'all are going to have to do something. Y'all here. Not to say they're about to be out here terrorizing us. Breaking into cars and stealing radios. No, dog. It ain't going to be that. So you can decide. But yeah, I went to this school in the South, and I had gone to do a talk, and they took me around, to meet everybody in the athletic department. And I remember this one guy had come in. He was working on his master's. He was there with his kid, talking about his wife. Like, it was clear that he had gotten a lot good out of going to school at this place. And, and they told me that if it weren't, basically, he's one of these guys that if he had not played football, would have never had these opportunities, never would have been at these places. But then the woman I'm talking to takes it aside. She's like, but every now and then we get somebody who can't read. And they got to have a whole different program.
Right.
Like, what do we do for this kid who can't read? Coach, he letting the kid in who can't read.
Right.
He knows that. Somebody has told him that this boy can't read. They know that. Somebody's getting that test taken for him so that he can get there. They know this stuff. You don't have to do that, right? Like, that's something that these coaches don't have to do, but they choose to.
So do you think does that hurt or harm kids? Because in some cases, I was a kid who was academically ineligible, but I learned methodology by going to school. Now, I would have never been able to get into college without basketball. Like, it just wasn't my thing. But when I got into school, I wasn't, I guess, a charity case, but I learned methodology. Like I learned how to research. I learned how to communicate, articulate my points. I learned how to be confident, right? Like one thing that athletes aren't is confident in environments outside of athletics. Where is that ultimate, again, I'm going to always ask about the balance. Like, where do you find the balance?
Question. Yo, that's such a great question. I remember like Penny Hardaway, for example, right? Penny Hardaway was a Prop 48 case going to Memphis. It was on the Dean's list once he got there, right? Like there really are so many guys who just need to be in the right situation and to figure some things out and get some personal attention. Like you went to a smaller private school, which is a big deal, like on, on doing that kind of stuff. And so I'm with you. I don't want to get to a point where you're just looking at these guys and saying, if you could not get into insert university here, then you can't get in, right? It would never be that. But I also think that they got to be able to figure out, and I think this gets lost in it, how many guys actually like do want to be better at this, right? Like I think most people, if you were giving them a choice, would you rather not be academically strong? All of them would want to be. And I watched the same thing you talked about, all those athletes who come in and their lack of confidence when they're in a space. Like when Julius Peppers, during the whole UNC debacle, somebody leaked his transcript. And people, of course, laughed at him. And he put out a statement. And he was like, look, man, the way that you would feel on a football field is the way that I feel in a classroom. And people kind of chuckled that off. And I'm like, no, that's very real. Like I had to learn that because, again, my parents are college professors. So to me, I just show up in this world when I realized that the other kids on scholarship were feeling the same way to a degree as these athletes were feeling.
Right.
Man, but there are a lot of dudes that I think that you get them in that place. And if you tell them it's important, they're going to treat it like it's important. Like you had to get eligible to play. Like, okay, cool. Now we got to treat this like it's important. If you treat it like it's important, they'll treat it like it's important. If they succeed and you give positive reinforcement, they will crave that same positive reinforcement because don't nobody want to be stupid. Don't nobody want to be uninformed. Nobody does, right? Like you think about it, no matter where you are. These say people might pick on you for being a nerd, but more people pick on you for being stupid than they pick on you for being a nerd.
Wow. Right. Absolutely. Damn.
Like think about this. If those kids called me a nerd when I was growing up, I just gotta have to take it. If I called them stupid, they punch me in the face.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Nobody wants to be stupid.
Right.
Now, moving away from the college game, something that I always have enjoyed following you on social media, as well as your takes on ESPN and on the right time, in terms of the treatment of athletes once they reach the NFL. So now we had a really interesting case with the Carolina Panthers, the move away from Cam Newton and then the doubling down on Christian McCaffrey in terms of sort of the commodification of this talent and the treatment of black athletes. Where do you see us going in that space and trying to change the narrative around these athletes being entire people and in terms of also just being treated better than some people might otherwise think?
Yeah, like we got to get to a way, and I don't exactly know how to do it, but how to get people to figure out like just how fucked up they are in the first place. Right, because that's the first step is for them to recognize that and then take the steps down. And so often they don't realize it. Like I watched the Cam Newton experience for all the time I was in North Carolina. And then from here, it's just always been a fascinating topic for me to watch. And man, no matter how well he did, win the MVP, go to the Super Bowl, all that stuff, we're just waiting for that moment where everybody got to be right about what they said in the first place. And then you wind up getting them out of here. Cam's been out there doing all that charity stuff and everything that you ask your quarterback to do. We talk about guys sounding different than when they showed up. You see the work that he's done on his presentation and recognizing that he was the face of a franchise and everything that was required of that and the actual success that they had as a football team. All of that. They ain't treat him like nothing on the way out. It was just, okay, you got to go. Thanks for the memories, mutual decision, all of this stuff or whatever. And then they gave McCaffrey the contract, which is a contract that running backs generally don't get for all kinds of reasons. And McCaffrey's a good player, all that stuff, yeah. But then what happened is all the football media comes up and says, Matt Rule is showing what kind of player he's going to reward. What, good ones? Right. Okay, he's going to reward the best player on the team. Okay, we got that. Or what are you really trying to say? McCaffrey ain't working no harder than nobody else. He is a naturally gifted athlete with like high caliber athletes all up and down the bloodlines. Grandparents, his father won a Super Bowl as a wide receiver and ran a sub 4.4, by the way. Right? He went out here, just running crossing routes. All of this stuff. And it's just like, yo, why can't you break free from your initial belief that black people are just out here to perform athletically and white people do all this stuff because they're good people and hard workers, and that's how they wind up getting there? Like, you even think about when we talk about Michael Jordan with this documentary and everything, people talk about he's a ruthless, cutthroat competitor, but they don't say, man, that's a really hard worker, right? Like, we skip the hard work part and go straight to the motivation for what the hard work was. But in reality, no matter what moves you, you are a hard worker. That is what gets you here. And people just refuse to acknowledge how hard black people work to get to where they are. Because I'm here to tell you, I am 6'4". I could actually dunk a basketball before I was 6 feet tall. I am black. I ain't a major league nothing.
Right.
Like it ain't in the bones, man. I can't just wake up and all of a sudden go out here to hoop in the NBA.
Right. And it's like you mentioned the Jordan doc, right? So it's that I was taken aback by when we watch Michael Jordan, right? And everybody, like you said, everybody's talking about, oh, he's competitive, he's cutthroat. I heard people talking about, why didn't he look out for Scotty and all these other things, right? But I'm just curious, why is it that athletes, and I mean, maybe I'm asking a question that we already know the answer to, but we have to turn it into what can we pick away from him, right? So it's not that Michael Jordan was a fierce competitor. He really, what I saw Michael Jordan being a damn listener. I didn't know he listened so damn intently. Yeah. That was the one thing that knocked me off my feet about Tim Duncan. I joke with that dude today, like, yo, you should write a book called How to Be Coached. Like, this dude, that's maybe like the secret of some of the greats. Like, I didn't realize Michael Jordan was such an intense listener. There was a piece of that thing where he's staring at Phil Jackson, like Phil Jackson is literally spitting money out of his mouth. He was staring at him so intently. And I'm like, damn, I watched it like 3 or 4 times with my son. I'm like, because look at how intense Michael Jordan is listening, right? Mouth closed, standing at attention, eyes wide, absorbing all the information. Why do we get into this thing? And then with all of the other things that were in this documentary, people pull out of it Jordan versus LeBron. They pull out of it. Like, I'm like, what are y'all watching? What are you looking at? How do you pull all of that? How do you pull that out of what we just saw? And it's the same thing. Like, you see Cam Newton, and Cam is feeding homeless people after every Sunday game. He's doing sponsoring all types of kids, and you pull out what? This old adage that he's a privileged, not working hard, he's a prima donna. That's a conflict that I'm always sort of finding with way that black athletes are represented in the media, particularly.
You know what's kind of ironic about the stuff with Mike as you talk about the listening thing? And it goes through the doc, but this is just something we all know, which is Jerry Krause did all these things that Michael Jordan hated, right? And what you're going to get a lot of discussion around the document is how much of an asshole is Michael Jordan not, just based upon the way that he dealt with his teammates, right? But one thing I actually really respected about Krause that isn't going to get talked about enough is all those things that he did that Mike did not like. He was right just about every single time. He traded Charles Oakley for Bill Cartwright. Right. He was right. He fired Doug Collins and brought in Phil Jackson. He was right. Like, we got all these different things that we can point to, where Jerry Krause was right. He was the one guy who stood up to Michael Jordan. Now, he took a lot of hell for it, but in the end, Mike knows, yeah, you're right. Those are the moves to make. Meanwhile, you got all these dudes who played with Mike who's scared to say anything back to him. Right. And I was like, but no. It's been demonstrated. Mike wants you to stand up to him. Right. Like, Mike is that kind of guy where he wants you to push. Like, he's going to push. You're supposed to push back. This is the way it goes. And you're right. So a cat like that, people don't realize that, like, no, he's doing all this listening. I think that comes from, like, having the father that he had and then going to Dean Smith, the most widely respected man on the face of planet Earth. Right. And so he goes and listens to him. But none of these coaches, even like Mike would disregard sometimes what the coaches had to say. But if you had something worth hearing, Mike gonna listen. Well, listen, right. Right. And you're right. He does not. That is something. Dean Smith gets the credit for Mike listening, not Mike. Exactly, not Mike. Right. I hadn't really thought about that till you said it, but you're absolutely correct. Dean Smith gets the credit for getting Mike to listen, as opposed to Mike being willing to listen. Because if I was Mike, I wouldn't be listening to nobody. Right. I had an experience with Tim in San Antonio like that, and we're in this drill. And it's like a 5-on-5 drill. And we had gone, like, Pop does things in sections. So he'll, like, give you a piece and then you play. So he gives us a piece like, you're supposed to be right here. If you're here, you get the pass, you go finish.
Tim is like not where he's supposed to be, doesn't finish, and there's a ball boy on the baseline who says something under his breath. And Tim is like, "What did you say?" And the rest of us are like, "Hey, man, shut up. What are you doing, man? It's Tim Duncan. We're trying to like," and Tim is like, "No, what did you say?" And the dude is like, "I just said that if you were where Papa told you to be in the spot, you would have caught that cleaner. You'd have been able to finish it easier." And Tim looks at him and says, "You're absolutely right. My bad." And went down the floor. And I was like, "Oh, wow." Because me in New Orleans, where I was the top dog, I would have said, "Man, if you don't get your punk ass out my face, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing out here." But that's something again that I think was lost in those first couple episodes. But again, it speaks to your point of what we decide to pull away from these guys, right? I often with Cam, would question, right, this whole thing about him not being protected. I'm like, wait a minute now. If Brady got hit like that, if he kept getting rung up like this, there'd be some, people would say something in the media. There were a few folks speaking up for Cam, but it wasn't this push like Cam doesn't get protected by the referees. But then it goes back to this other point about whether or not he's a black athlete, he should be able to take it, right? Cam's a big, strong, running, physically fit quarterback. He should be able to take the hits, even when he's clearly standing there trying to be a pocket passer and guys are diving into his knees, guys are hitting him above the shoulders. And there's never that. There was never that respect given to him from the organization, and then it he's true at the way that they let him go out the door.
They never, at no point did I feel like this league treated him like a superstar quarterback.
Right.
We see superstar quarterbacks. We know what superstar quarterbacks look like, and we know how they are received in the leeway that they get in various ways. Cam never got that at any turn. And that's why it's going to be interesting to see with like Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, what's going to happen when they struggle, right? The first time they struggle, then what's going to happen?
Right.
Because you cannot out-achieve racism. It's not an option. You can't play so well that they can't bring your ass right back down here. That ain't how it goes.
In terms of the coaching. So now we're talking about a group of athletes who have been incredibly successful, and Howard dropped some crazy numbers on us. Like in Major League Baseball, there's never been a black coach that didn't play before they became the coach. And there's only like 5 instances in the NBA history, and it was similar in the NFL. That barrier to entry, and I think, you've talked about this on both Right Time, High Noon, everywhere else, that atmosphere that's been created, how much of that is the media and how much of that are the leagues and the atmospheres that they're creating around these organizations?
I think the media, as much as anything else, is reacting to the leagues. Like one thing I found about guys who cover sports, when it comes time to like talking about somebody getting run out of there, they don't start talking about that till somebody start talking to them about it. All right. Really? Like that's something that I figured out over the course of time. So like I remember, I don't think this was the year Les Miles got fired. I think it was the year before when they were trying to fire him.
Yeah.
And there was a long column by whoever the like established columnist at the Baton Rouge Advocate, the newspaper down there, was about how, so they might fire Les Miles. And when I read that, I was like, ain't no might. They gonna fire Les Miles, right? You did not decide all by yourself that you were gonna wake up and say, I think that they should fire Les Miles. Somebody let you know, we think about firing Les Miles. And you might want to let the folks know about that. See how it, and see how it plays, right? That happens a lot. That's the way that goes. So, like, the thing I always try to explain to people, though, when it comes to coaches is, you give me at the end of any season, if the league got 30 teams, I can make an argument for firing 25 coaches every single year. If you want to fire somebody, coming up with a reason to fire them isn't hard, and getting people to go along with it isn't hard either. You can come up with it real quick if you decide that is what you want to do. And I think that by and large starts with teams. Now, I think the media easily jumps on it because it plays into the same biases that they already possess when they go into this, right? Like one thing, you ain't gonna have that many people in media who are the ones like trying to explain why the black guy should actually get to keep his job. Peer pressure is real, These are things. They matter. They're large. They're bigger than just like the individual interactions. And so I think the media bears some responsibility for not pushing back on some of these things. But the genesis of the environment, that's coming from the teams and the league.
Yeah. And do you think? I mean, I know in baseball is an extreme, but do you think there's some hire out there? Do you think that there's a moment? When I was in college, and his name is escaping me, but when Notre Dame hired the black football
Tyrone
coach,
Willingham,
like we felt like I don't know. Even as a young player, I was like, oh man, this might be it. Like we're getting through the thick of it, because I think Notre Dame was like the last place in my mind, particularly as a young person, that would hire a black coach. Right. So do you think that? Do you think that there's a point where we get to finally, if there is a hire, right? If there's someone that we could that gets hired, that gets like the Dallas Cowboys, for instance, right, or the Yankees, for instance.
You know what we need? I think this will be the closest thing to making it happen to me. If they hire some brother that ain't got no business getting the job in the first place, and then he turns out to be successful. Right? Maybe that'll be the thing. Of course, that first part will never happen. Right. The you ain't got no business getting this job is very, very unlikely to happen. But maybe that's the thing that kind of tips it over and makes people like kind of shake off, because you have to be like such an optimal candidate to get a job as a black person in the first place. And then if you don't do well, they're like, damn, we went and got the best black dude we could ever find. And he couldn't even get the job done, right? After that happens, the next guy, there's always a measure of overcorrection, right? So Willingham got fired after 3 years, the only coach Notre Dame ever had who didn't get to work out his first full 5-year contract. Charlie Weiss then got a 10-year contract extension based off a loss the year after they fired him. Like, y'all, like nobody's reading the room here? Right. Nobody's peeping game on what exactly it is that you're doing. And just so many of these cats feel like they don't have to treat us right. And in the end, media does not, and this is where I blame media. Media does not force anybody to treat us right. Media does not push these things. We have the same Rooney Rule. I sure wish these guys would start acting right, instead of demanding that they act right in the first place.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it blows my mind that Bieniemy doesn't have a job right now.
Yeah, like that one. Everybody that's worked that job under Andy Reid has gone and got another job. Like this is a sure bet that somebody goes and gives you a head coaching job. And I'll be fair, I'm careful about these things because I never know what's happening, right? So I know about one dude in the NBA who year after year after year you would hear, why hasn't somebody hired this guy to be a head coach? He was an assistant at the time and fairly visible. Year after year after year. Man, then I talked to some people, and it's black people too, just to be clear. And they were like, yo, man, he showed up in here unprepared. Like, and so I only bring that up not to be like black people be unprepared. No, but sometimes there is a reason why that one dude isn't getting the job.
Doesn't work.
Now, it ain't the reason why everybody ain't getting no job. But I am very wary of going to the wall on these cats I don't know, and then they be like, "Yo, come here, let me talk to you for a second, yo."
Right. Is there a correlation with black coaches? We had a conversation with Baron Davis, and he talked to us about how when we were together for a few months before he was traded. This was my second year in New Orleans when Byron Scott became the head coach. And Barron admitted later, right, that he had an issue relating to a black coach. And it was something that, it took him some time to realize, right, to be mature enough to recognize. But, I've experienced that as well, because you go through this moment where you don't. So white power, in the sense of a white person being in control of something, is something that's reinforced in society on a daily basis, right? The police chief, the principal of the school, the dean, everybody, right? Then you come into the environment of sports and your coach is black, and there's a part of you that says, and it's a part of you that is dark for us. It's, does this know what he's talking about? Like, we question.
Yeah.
Right. And that part to me is something that I had to learn, figure out, but you almost have to work through that. And I think that has implications with how that coach presents himself. So you've got someone like Avery Johnson, who picked up the nickname Slavery Johnson because he worked his guys to death. Right. B. Scott was the same way with us. He worked us to death. But it was like, I felt like at times coach had to separate. Like, these are my guys, but I'll kick their ass if they, so, and then there are other guys who, they say, well, he can't be hired because he's going to be too comfortable with the players. He's not going to hold them accountable. And I feel like black coaches are in this weird.
Right. What are the other?
Yeah, it's like this
Right.
weird mix they try to find themselves in.
Yeah, so Avery was an interesting case because I don't even know Avery personally, but I know why Avery is the way Avery is. Avery 5'10" from New Orleans, Louisiana, right? Went to some like
right.
he's like, do you have any clue what I had to do to get here? I don't think you do. Like Scott Skiles was the same way, right? And Scott Skiles was a much better player, like as a college guy. You know, he was always touted, but they had to grind so hard to get it that they have a hard time with anybody who doesn't grind as hard
That way,
as
right?
they do, right? Because they just like, yo, this is what you do to get to the NBA. But I think we all grow up in the same society, so it means that we also grow up with the same racism and the same stuff, and we as Black people also take in a lot of the stuff that white people take in, and a lot of those subconscious biases and everything else. You don't realize it's happened until it's tested. You know, and so Barron is interesting when you say that because Barron, if I'm not mistaken, Barron went to like the artsy magnet high school, Crossroads, right? He's like he went to high school with like Jessica Alba. Like I know people that went there. I bet his coach there wasn't Black, right? And so, you know, and then you go to UCLA and you're in that space, and I could until he probably had never even thought about it to the moment he said it to himself. He was like, yo. What this dude know. And keep in mind, Baron Davis is a dude from Los Angeles and Byron Scott is a Showtime Laker.
Right.
And I'm not throwing any shade at Baron for this to be clear, but I'm just saying that that's how powerful the forces are.
Exactly.
That, you know, that are on top of us. And I do think that a lot of times people look at themselves and say, well, what does he even know? When in reality, you should be saying to yourself, do you have any clue what he had to do to get here? I don't think you do. Hey, let me tell you, man, they ain't giving us a whole lot of jobs we ain't qualified for. Like it can happen sometimes, but not a lot.
Right. And that, I mean, I had to learn that. I really did, man. That what you said speaks true because that's something that is for all the knowledge that I claim and proud that I've accumulated over the years. Like that's something that I'm standing there like, damn, am I really doing this? Like, am I really? You know, it's like the first time we see Black pilots, we like, oh shit. Like I'm telling you. It was for me. I get on the airplane and I turn around and I'm like, oh, all right, stop it, David. That brother can do exactly what he needs to do, just like anybody else. But it's like we become, you know, we become a part of what we see as well. What is being pushed in society, we embrace it. And it becomes a part of our subconscious, even though we don't realize it.
And let me tell you, man, that's where I got lucky myself personally growing up in HBCU world. Right. Because all these people that had all these positions of authority and power and everything else were all Black. Right. Like the idea that like those things are things that Black people shouldn't do and places where Black people aren't, never part of my life.
Right.
Never at any point in my life.
Right.
You know, but I do think for a lot of people, if you've never seen it and you've never been around it, you just don't realize how much of this stuff that we ultimately take in. Like I've had the good fortune of, it's been a while since I did this, but like for myself personally, working with young white college students, it take them a while to believe that like somebody like me exists, right? Like you imagine that you're a freshman in college and 23, 24-year-old me walks in teaching the class, right? And I'm kicking it like I kick it, right? Like I'm not coming in here with like a jacket with elbow patches and all that stuff, right? I look like one of these dudes that you see on the yard or that you see on the street or whatever it is. I look like them. In a lot of ways, I sound like them. But then I start talking about the stuff we're talking about, and now they're trying to figure out, like, none of this fits, right? The Black dude is not supposed to be the smart guy, and if the Black dude is supposed to be the smart guy, he's not supposed to look like the other Black dudes, right? Like, I went to high school with a Black dude that was the smart guy, and that's what he did, like, all of this. And so I would find myself, and I had the patience going in, because I recognized, hey, man, the Tupac line, I was given this world, I didn't make it, right? Like, they've taken in all of this stuff. And it would be really interesting to hear the things that they would say kind of about Black people that they didn't even know they were saying because it's so common. It's just part of what everything is. Like when somebody will say something about like every Black quarterback that comes around, you got to ask yourself whether they qualified to read a defense. They never ask that question about white people ever. And so I would hear these things from them young and just hit them back with a simple question. And they're like, wow, you know, I hadn't even really thought about that, right? Black folks do the same thing, man. We're in the same exact place in this. And I don't blame them because, again, I don't blame them anymore than I blame white people because you can't fight it off until you know there's an enemy to fight. Right.
Yeah, it took me a while. As polarizing as my childhood was and sort of coming into consciousness early, but then I never intermixed the worlds. So it was like, okay, what's going on in the world isn't the same as what's going on in the basketball environment.
Right.
This is a part where I ask two questions. They're really simple questions, more life questions. But the first one, I think we're literally the same age. So we kind of got this world the same, the whole mindfulness, routine, being strategic with your mornings. So I always like to ask people, like, what is it that you do in the morning? Like, if you have one, what is the first thing you do, your morning routine, that sort of sets your day in motion?
Yo, I've never like been great at that, but now that this stuff has happened, I'm doing yoga now, man. I get up, try to get up sometime at 7 o'clock hour, get about 15, 20 minutes of yoga in. Like that for me is a big one that I get done. When we were doing the TV show, I'd get up, check over what we had to do for that, think about it in the shower, get out, get dressed, like do a conference call, and then go from there. But now, trying to, treating this bid like a bid, trying to get my body right, get a stretch on to start the day. And I got to say, everything everybody always said about yoga, like I don't get all high-minded and metaphysical about this stuff, but I see why other people do. I recommend it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a good thing because, like, for me, it was always, my life was always centered around basketball. So I'm always looking at the phone, the alarm, got to get up. Now that I don't have basketball, I've kind of had to figure out like a morning routine, figuring out like, how do I get my day started? It helps that I've got a 1-year-old, but aside from that, it's just figuring out, certain things to get myself going.
First week after quarantine, I was lost. I didn't have the things that structured my day. Like my day was structured around a schedule that was externally generated. After that, man, I was like, yo, man, like, why am I not in the shower yet? Like, what am I doing?
Right.
Yes, I've enjoyed your tweets about like, hey, I showered before noon.
Yeah, man, I'm getting there now, though, man. It make a difference. I'm telling you.
Right. The other question is about failure. And, I've had a fail up moment in my life. I was supposed to graduate high school in 98, didn't, because of my grades, because I basically ignored school as a freshman, couldn't walk with my class. So I had to flunk out of school, take an extra year of military school to graduate high school. And that was a really hard thing to do. But I always sort of contextualize it as a fail up moment for me, where I reached this moment in my life where I failed, right? I didn't accomplish this thing of graduating high school with my class. And it was really awkward telling people, yeah, man, I'm not going to graduate. But you to start a basketball team. Yeah, but I'm not going to graduate. And it was that moment, though, for me that like shifted. Like I no longer wanted to be viewed as, I was like, yo, you can't put too much in this basketball stuff because it affects everything else. Right. People calling me big dummy and stuff like that. And so it was a fail up moment for me where I felt like that was my lowest. And then everything from that moment on, because of my sort of I kind of got restructured in the sense that I needed to take care of myself better. I needed to do what I needed to do, my responsibility list, right? Dedicating myself to the game and all the attributes around the game. So where in your life, at what moment, I mean, you've achieved a lot. You've gone through, the corporate world. You talked about, you were teaching early on. Where in your life did you have a fail up moment?
Oh man, I'm gonna have a hard time picking just one, to be honest. Okay. When I flunked out of graduate school, that's a big one.
Right.
Like, I mean, the idea that I would flunk out of anything, nobody had ever considered anything like that, right, man? That shit was hard. It was hard, and I didn't work hard enough, and I had to recalibrate. That's when I threw myself wholly into doing media stuff. And I went from there, and I got a contract to be a columnist at ESPN.com's Page 2 in 2006. And, this is like the Bill Simmons, David Halberstam, Ralph Wiley. Like, I mean, Halberstam and Wiley, I think it passed away by then. But it was it was heavy hitters, and I was one of them. And I had the contract for a year. And then they didn't renew it. And then after that happened, I started doing radio, and it was taken off. And then the radio station went out of business. And then I got another radio job. And then the radio station went out of business. And then I did the different TV stuff for ESPN. And honestly, I think I'm in one right now, right? Like, they canceled the TV show. It happens. It ain't, these things happen in the business, but I'm in a period right now where after that happened and with the quarantine, I really said to myself, well, I need to recalibrate, and what I need to do more than anything else. It's almost like you hear about the rappers who be like, I moved back into projects for my last album, right? Like I got that hunger again. I totally understand it now, right? Like I'm here writing YouTube videos that we're doing. Just getting on wherever I can get on, doing podcasts and stuff, because now is the time. There's no reason for me not to work hard right now just because something didn't go right. And so I found that for myself, I have not had any one of these moments that's hit me and it's made me want to quit. It's made me realize I maybe needed to do something else, but it's told me however hard I was working, I probably needed to work a little harder.
So one other Bomani, in terms of a positive outlook, once this is all over and we have the go-ahead from medical professionals and not some other folks to go back outside in a safe way, what are you most looking forward to doing?
Man, that is a very good question. I feel like I feel like we took restaurants for granted, right? The idea that somebody will cook my food, bring my food, pick up my plate, and even refill my drink. I got to do all that shit now. Every single bit of it, right? I forgot what it was like to have somebody, like, I got trips and stuff I would like to take. I don't know how long it's going to be before I get on a plane or go to one of these other countries where they may not accept my insurance, right? Like, I don't know what that's going to be, but I think that we are going to be so excited just to be sitting down at a restaurant.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
It definitely is. So, well, Bomani, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you again for agreeing to join us. And that's a wrap on this episode of Forward Thinking.
All right, man. I appreciate you having me.